Hey everyone, welcome to Everyday Infertility. This is your host, Savannah Keys. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about infertility in the workplace. Now, I know this is a hot topic between women that I've talked to and even men that I've talked to going through infertility journeys. In the infertility support groups that I'm in on Facebook, I see that this is, something that people are always asking questions about. So I wanted to take some time and share my experience and my story of how I shared that I was going through infertility and the upcoming treatments and what that looked like with my employer. And, the expectations that I think are so important to set for yourself and for your company. And, just kind of what that looks like for you and your spouse. So, before I jump into the topic in my experience, I actually called one of my best friends who is in HR. And I ran this idea of the topic by her and I was like, hey, talk to me about this. And she actually did the research for me. So thank you, Ashton. But she found an article that said 23% of employees feel that their employer would not understand what they're going through or their infertility journey. 23%. I was actually shocked by that. I thought it might be higher. But this one was really shocking. And even her being in HR, she was like, oh, wow. 30% of employees fear that their job would be at risk if they shared that they were going through infertility or they shared that their time off was actually for infertility treatments. Now, I hear that. And I actually worked for a company that did benefits and employee relations a couple years ago. And when I heard that, the first thing that popped into my head is, well, I know that, employees or employers are not allowed to ask their employees specifics about their health because it could come back as discrimination, if they were to be let go because it's no surprise, or maybe it is a surprise to you all, but employers' benefits are based on their employees' health, how often they go to the doctor, do they have surgeries? Do they have diseases? What does that look like? All of those things go into your rates. So that's the first thing that came into my mind. The second thing that popped into my mind is, well, it's kind of awkward. Like, hey, boss, I'm struggling with infertility. I'm going to have to go through this or be at more doctor's appointments or whatever. You don't want to feel like a burden, but it's also just a taboo topic, which, hello, that's why we're here. That's why I created this podcast. So, infertility does plague so many more people than we know about. When you look at the stats of infertility is 1 in 8 women and miscarriage is 1 in 4 women. Look around at the people you know. Look around at your employees. Look around at the people that you work with. There are people all throughout your organization that may be battling this in secret, or their spouses may be battling it, behind closed doors. So I just thought this was such an interesting topic, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. So I'm going to share my experience. We're going to talk about expectations. And if you guys have questions, feel free to reach out. I am an open book. You can get me on Instagram. You can reach out to me on email, whatever works for you guys. And I'd love to hear your stories. Reach out and share with me. How is it, sharing this with your employer? What did that look like? Was it easy to take time off for all of your treatments and things of that nature? I think that's such an important thing for us, especially as women, to be talking about in the workplace. So let's go back to when and kind of why and how I decided to share that I was going through infertility treatments with my employer. So what's interesting, and I always want to be open and honest with you guys, like that's why I'm here, to be transparent. When I first started at my job, which was a little over 3 years ago, I remember people in office and, even my boss would be like, oh, when are you and Drake going to have kids? And at this point, I didn't know that we were going to have to go through IVF, but I did know at that point, like we were trying and it wasn't working. And so for me, it was easier to tell someone that I worked for or worked with, like, oh, it'll happen when it happens. We're enjoying being married, focused on our careers, blah, 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 blah. Because do you really want to look at your boss and be like, oh man, boss, we've been trying for X amount of time and it's just not working? No. Now, if someone had asked me, I would share that. But back then, so early, I think I started at my job like a month or two into us trying. Once you really get to know people and you start having personal conversations, I would say people started asking me, like, hey, when are you going to have kids? Around the time that we were starting to talk to our doctors of like, why isn't this working? So I was not embarrassed, but it's like I didn't really have anything to share with them outside of, yeah, I'm trying and it's not working. So not that I would lie, but I would just say, like, hey, when it happens, it happens. Now, there was a time, I've shared on multiple episodes that around the year mark, we really were like, what is going on? Why is this not working? So we started with Clomid and did medicated cycles. And then at about 18 months is when we did the HSG and found out that my tubes were blocked. So for me, when I started with the Clomid, there were a couple girls in my office at the time that I became friends with and to this day still have a great relationship with. And I shared with them, like, hey, yeah, we're actually struggling to get pregnant and we're on Clomid. And so it was nice having a friend in the office that I could be like, oh my God, I'm like dying of hot flashes. Because if you've been on Clomid and that is a side effect that you unfortunately had, oh my God, it would be like 32 degrees outside and I would be like clawing at my jacket and my shirt and be like, get this off. I'm literally going to die of like just a sweat attack right now. So I would talk to like girlfriends at work that I had made about that. Now, once we had went through the HSG and received the news that we were going to have to go through IVF, work was not even in the top like 50 things that came to mind. But in the coming days, I was like, we're about to start meeting with all of these clinics. Once we find a clinic, hopefully we're able to start our infertility journey and IVF process soon. From all of the research I've done, it's saying that you're going to be off work quite a bit. I'm going to have to tell my work, So, small background, or I guess big piece of the background, I am in sales. When I found out that me and my husband had to go through IVF, I had been promoted into a management position. So, there are a lot of eyes and a lot of expectations on you as you are leading and running a team. And being in sales, like your job is tied to a number and performance. And so I didn't want to have these excuses of like, oh, I have a doctor's appointment. Oh, I have this, and kind of it feel like I'm just like taking off work all the time to take off work. So I talked to my husband and we made the decision to share with my work and even his work because we did not want them to think, wow, they're off a lot and just for doctor's appointments. No, of course they can't ask you. Like in my state, in the state of Oklahoma, they can't ask you like, why are you going to the doctor? Some employers will ask for like a doctor's notes. So I understand like this is just my experience and of course my state laws, but I decided that it was best for me to be open and honest with my employer about what I was going through so they hopefully understood why I was about to be taking off a lot of work. So I remember, oh gosh, it was the hardest conversation to have. I remember I called my boss and I'm like sitting in my bed. Hold on, I'm going to cough. Okay, so I remember, and it is such a vivid memory. It was probably a week or so after we had had my HSG and were told, and had met with my OB and were told, you have to go through IVF. So we sat down, we looked at fertility clinics. We set up a few appointments. And in those appointments, because some of them were like a quick consultation over the phone, I did ask, like, hey, if we are to sit down with you and do a consultation, how quickly would we be able to get in? What do those next couple appointments look like? And what is the time frame? Because when I wanted to sit down and tell my employer, I wanted to set the right expectations, and we'll talk about expectations here in a second. But I wanted to give them an idea of like how much time I should be off. So when I go to tell my employer, and like I said, this is such a vivid memory, I'm like sitting in the middle of our bedroom, in my bed, and it was like a work from home day or something. And it was like the start of the morning, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sit in my bed and I'm gonna call my boss and I'm gonna tell him. And he is a male, and he is married and had a kid. And so I was hoping he would understand. And we were close. I feel like we had a really great working relationship. We talked about our spouses and our families, and it wasn't just business. Like, we actually, I would say I considered him like a friend. And so I remember calling him and I'm like, hey, I have to tell you something and it's kind of awkward, and I just want to let you know, last week or the week before or whatever, when I was off, I had a procedure and it actually came back that me and Drake cannot conceive naturally. And so we have to go through IVF. And I remember, because it's so new and I was obviously coping with this and like a freaking mess in the weeks after this news, that I was crying. And I wasn't embarrassed sharing that I was going through IVF. It was like I was embarrassed, I was crying. And I will never forget, he was so understanding, and he was like, I am so sorry to hear that. We as a company are here for you, whatever you need, take as much time off. And then one thing is he actually shared, like, hey, I have friends and family that have gone through this. So I have a little bit of an idea of what that looks like, and I get it. And I don't think that could have went any better than I expected. Now, I understand, and as I continue to share my experience with you all, please know that I know I am so lucky. Like, my company is great and they treat me awesome, and they have just handled this situation amazingly. Like, so amazing, guys. And I understand that that is not everyone's situation. So, I just want to preface that I know how grateful and how lucky I am. So once I got off the phone with him, I actually called our VP of HR and shared the news with her as well, because I had told my boss yes, but I also wanted to make sure HR was in the loop as well. Now, at the time, my company was like 50 some odd employees. So you may not call HR, you may not call your boss, you may call other people. But in such a small company, I wanted them to know, hey, I've shared this with my boss. Hey, you're going to see PTO requests. I just want to make sure that everyone kind of was on the same page. And she handled it great as well. I mean, when I shared this news with first my boss, second our VP of HR, like, it was just such a breath of fresh air how they accepted it and how they made me feel so comfortable of, we have your back, take as much time as you need, we're here for you, like, let us know. So again, it couldn't have gone any better. Now, over the next couple weeks, I did share the news with the team that I managed, because I didn't want them thinking, oh, wow, Savannah's off all the time. Is she interviewing elsewhere? Or, is something wrong? Is everything okay? I wanted them to know, like, hey, guys, I am going through IVF. I am going to have a lot of doctor's appointments over the next couple weeks, but I'm available. So if you guys need me, call, text, a lot of it is sitting in waiting rooms or whatever. But like, I wanted them to feel supported and not feeling like I'm just like up and leaving them. So I shared that with my team. I eventually shared it with other people in the company. I think to date, which it's been, over a year at this point, most people in my company, we've grown to about 70-ish employees. Most people that I come in contact with, I share this with them. One, I want to break the stigma of infertility. Two, I want to educate people. Three, you get to talking about your interests and what you do outside of work. And I share with people I have a podcast. And four, I don't know, I'm an open book and I share everything with everyone. So, that's for me kind of when and how I knew it was time to share with my employer when I was about to be off work an extensive amount. Now, let's talk about being off work an extensive amount. If you have been through any type of infertility appointments or treatments, I am preaching to the choir. You already understand. But for those of you that may just be going into your infertility journey, I want to set some expectations around how much time you're going to be off. Now, I can only speak to my experience with timed intercourse while I was on Clomid and then my IVF experience. I can't speak to anything else, but I feel like they're all kind of similar in terms of appointments and time off from women and men that I've talked to going through other journeys. So, um, for me, when I was meeting with my doctor and going through timed intercourse on Clomid, I really didn't have to go to the doctor that often. I think I was going like once or twice a month just to do blood work to make sure we ovulated, to do a pregnancy test if I thought, let's change our dosage, let's talk about things. So like once a month, not bad. When I did the HSG, I actually did take an entire day off. That did luckily fall on a Friday. So with the news, the traumatic news of like, hey, both of your tubes are blocked, you won't be able to conceive naturally, you're going to have to go through IVF. That HSG appointment fell on a Friday, and then the appointment with my OB fell on a Monday. So I took both of those days off to just be alone and sit in my feelings. Now, once I got into my IVF journey, if you all go back and listen to my episode about how to select and find your clinic, you will know my first clinic was in Oklahoma City, which is where I live and where I work. I was incredibly lucky that my first clinic was literally 15 minutes from my house, 15 minutes from my work. So I didn't have as much time off, but during the egg retrieval process, I was going into the clinic every other day for 2 weeks. And then I did take off 2 days for the egg retrieval. Now, again, I was lucky that my egg retrieval fell on a Thursday. So I took Thursday off, I took Friday off, had the weekend, returned back to work on Monday. If it had been in the middle of the week, I might have taken 3 days off and worked from home the other days just to rest and recover because I was pretty sore. For my transfer, and really for all of the transfer rounds that I've been through so far, you are going into the office, maybe once or twice a week for 2 to 3 weeks. And then for the transfer, I've always taken the day off of transfer and then the next day. So that's just kind of some expectations of how often you may be off. Now, again, I was lucky that my original clinic was 15 minutes away. So going in every other day during the egg retrieval process was easy. Those monitoring appointments sometimes are like 10, 15 minutes long. So I could literally go the first hour of work or during lunch or whatever, and it really not feel like I'm taking off work. Now that I have switched clinics and my clinic is 90 minutes away, and then where I will do the transfer is, a whole state away, I am taking off much more time. So monitoring appointments looks like 3 hours round trip, maybe 30 minutes in the office. So I'm taking a half day off here and there. And then when it comes time for the transfer, I'm going to have to take a day off to travel there and then the day for the transfer and, maybe take the next day off. I don't know what that looks like just yet, but it is a lot more time. So when it comes to time off, it is so important for you to speak with your clinic and understand what that's going to look like for you, or speak with your doctor and understand, for my treatment plan, what are the expectations so I can set those. Now, at the time that I was originally going through IVF, my company did paid time off and sick leave. I think I had a week of sick leave and 3 weeks of PTO. Again, I know that that is not everyone's situation, and I was very grateful for that. So when my clinic was in Oklahoma City and it's 15-minute drive there, maybe a 15-minute appointment and a 15 drive back, I would just take that as my lunch break. If my appointment was first thing in the morning, I would just not take a lunch that day. So I would make it work with my schedule. So I wasn't taking time off. Um, for the egg retrieval process, for the transfer process, yes, I was taking time off. And my company was, very gracious to let me take that as sick time because I was at a doctor's office doing a procedure, things like that. So it really didn't affect my paid time off, my vacation time, my free time. Now, I want to be very transparent with you. My company has now enforced flex time or unlimited PTO. It sounds great. It is great. I just still want to make sure I'm setting those expectations with the team that I manage, with my management, and, with the company of like, hey, I'm not taking advantage of this flex time or unlimited PTO. I am, going to be out here and this and that and that. And so I'm still setting those expectations with them. Now, I told you at the beginning of this podcast, I have spoken with plenty of men and women going through their own infertility journeys. I am also in a lot of infertility and IVF support groups on Facebook. I see people all the time talking about taking off work and traveling to clinics. And I see so often that they aren't in similar positions as me. They only have 2 weeks PTO, or maybe they've already used their PTO depending on where it falls in the year, or maybe they feel judged for taking off, or maybe they're hourly, and if they aren't at work they aren't making money. And so I understand everyone's situation is different. This is why I think I am such a big proponent of sharing that you are going through infertility treatments with your company, because maybe they can work with you. And instead of you having to take PTO, maybe they let you kind of move some things around. Maybe they're a little more flexible. If you're hourly, maybe they let you make it up somewhere else. I understand that everyone's situation is going to look and feel very different. But if you don't tell them, I think that's where these statistics that I shared with at the beginning of the podcast come from. 23% of employees feel that their management or their company wouldn't understand. 30% of employees fear it would affect their job. I don't know your job. I don't know your company. I don't know your situation. But the statistics say that 1 in 8 women go through infertility, whether they have previously experienced it, whether they're currently going through it, whether they will go through it one day. They probably know someone. And I know that people are scared to tell their work. I have, people in my life that I talk to about this topic that are going through it, and they're like, I just am not ready to share with my job yet. Well, one, that is completely up to you. I'm not here to tell you you have to do something or you don't. This is your decision. But if it helps you make the decision to tell your job or not, if we don't share these things, I think it adds to the stigma. If we don't share to these things, I think that's where the fear comes from of, oh, did you see Sally at the water cooler? She's been off a lot lately. I wonder what she's up to. What if your work accepted and embraced fertility? I know I educate it at every turn within my company, and I talk about it with everyone so that it's not taboo. And I'm not saying you need to go and tell every single person and walk down the cubes in the offices and be like, hey, Paul, I'm dealing with infertility. I'm not saying that. But what if you could educate your employer on infertility and women needing to be off and having to take this time? So then the next person that comes in doesn't have that same experience if it's negative or maybe not the most positive. I think we can start to chip away. And my goal, hopefully, is one day that it's not 23% of people feel their employers wouldn't understand. It's 10, and then it's 5, and then it's 3, and then it's 0. It's not 30% of people fear that they would lose their job or their job be negatively impacted in any way. It's 20, then 10, then 5, then 0. But it starts with us having these conversations. And look, I am not sitting here telling you every conversation is going to be fairy tale. I had great conversations with my boss and my VP of HR and everyone that I worked with. And everyone has been incredibly supportive. But you have to make that decision whether to share with them. If you don't share with them, I do want to challenge you to think what are those, and I hate to use the word consequences, but I was talking with a girl the other day and I was sharing like, hey, I told my boss and it was a great experience. My company knows they're very supportive of me needing to be out and take off and go to doctor's appointments. And she had shared with me, like, I haven't told them and I don't know that I want to tell them. So we got to talking, like, we are off quite a bit for your appointments. She was like, yeah, I'm just telling them, like, I have a doctor's appointment here. I have a dentist appointment. I have to go this, that, the other. That's hard. And, you have to keep up with those lies. And, and this is just me and my personality, but I would start to fear, as I did in the beginning, that my company would be like, wow, Savannah's off a lot. And she has all of these like random appointments. Again, you have to do what is best for you in your job. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I think it's important to set those expectations. If you are going to share with your company, set the right expectations. Now, one thing I also want to talk about is it's hard to set time expectations. For example, there have been plenty of times where I'm like, oh, I actually have to drop what I'm doing tomorrow and go into the clinic for additional blood work or ultrasounds, or, oh, my transfer got moved up or pushed back or whatever. There are very short time notices in IVF and IUI, and I'm sure other fertility journeys. So one thing that I always say is like, hey, I'm going to be off, or like, hey, I'm going into a cycle. I'm going to be off, here and there. It should be around this time frame, but I don't know. Things can always shift. Setting the right expectation. Now, that's for me. I also have a spouse in this. So I do want to set here for a few minutes and talk about your significant other. I have been lucky to have a company that has unlimited PTO. My husband's company does not have unlimited PTO. My husband, while he is salary, he is also in a sales position. And so if he is not at work selling, he's not making commission. So we also had to sit down and think about, what does this journey look like from his point of view and work as well. So, of course, we decided very early on he will only go to the very important appointments. Monitoring appointments, 10, 15 minutes. The downside is maybe you do get bad news. I've been through so many appointments where they're like, your lining's not thick enough, or, the appointment where they canceled my, third IVF transfer. So that's the downside. But we made a decision together as a couple of, you need to be at work and we will make this work. So short appointments, the appointments that you're kind of just going in and out and it's, 10, 15 minutes, he doesn't need to go to those. We made that decision together. Transfers, egg retrievals, important appointments where we're meeting with our doctor. Yeah, he does need to take off for that. So we've found what works for us, but we have those conversations. I mean, we're going into another transfer cycle. And he's like, okay, What do I need to take off for? About how many days is it's going to be? Okay, here's how many PTO days I have left. Here's it's going to line up with this, that, the other. And we're having to work through that. So when you're talking about infertility in the workplace, remember your spouse or your significant other as well, because there is two to this situation in most times. So I think that is something that also plays into it. And we have been so incredibly lucky that my husband's company understands what we're going through. He still only has a certain number of PTO days. So we have to really think about that, not only when we're going into infertility treatments, but we have a life as well. He just traveled out to California to be with me after a work trip. That was 2 days that he was off work. We're going to Boston for our anniversary. That's going to be 3 days off work. Right there, that's 5 days taken from his PTO. We don't know if this next transfer is going to work. What if we have to have 2 or 3 more transfers? We have to plan out a tentative schedule for the year of like, okay, well, let's save these days just in case. Now, we are also very lucky that if we were in a situation where he needed to take time he doesn't have, they would work with him. And that's what's important. You may have a stricter PTO schedule or days. You may have an hourly schedule, but if your employer will work with you at the end of the day, that is comforting. Another thing I want to talk about is expectations. So we've talked about setting the expectations of like, hey, I'm going through infertility and hey, I'm going through infertility treatments. We've talked about the expectations of time off, but there are other things that play into this. For me, medication side effects. It was actually the timed intercourse with the Clomid that has been the worst for me. There were days that I just didn't feel good. I was really nauseous, like I was really tired. I just did not feel good. And so at that time, I was not sharing it with my work. So I was taking sick days. Looking back, yes, it would have been nice for them to know so I could just be like, hey, my medicine is not sitting well with me today. Like, can I work from home? Can I take a day off? Whatever, and not feel bad about it. Now, one thing I left out of this whole thing that I should have said at the beginning is I also work from home 3 days a week and work in office 2 days a week. So that does also make things a little bit easier, but you're still away from work. So, in those situations, you have to do what works best with your schedule. If you're in office all day, if you're working from home, I still think it's the same in terms of setting the expectations and time off. Now, once we got into more serious treatments like IVF, I did tell people like, oh yeah, I'm taking medicine or this because I didn't know how my body was going to react to those medicines or future medications or whatever it may be. I have been extremely lucky that throughout my egg retrieval process, throughout my IVF transfers that I have been through to date, I haven't had any adverse medication side effects. But I talked to so many women who do headaches, extreme nausea, extreme fatigue, side effects from medicine, people breaking out in rashes or having allergic reactions, like those things happen. So I think it's also fair to maybe set that expectation of like, hey, not only am I going to be off a lot for doctor's appointments, but I'm going to be taking medication that may make me need an additional sick time or, something may happen. The biggest thing when I think of expectations of infertility in the workplace is sharing with people that you work with that this may not work or it may work. If it works, great. I hope you're pregnant. And then you have to have that conversation of like, hey, I'm pregnant. Maybe I'm sick. Maybe I need, more time off for doctor's appointments, maternity leave, paternity leave, all of that stuff. I have yet to get pregnant, so I can't speak to that. But I did tell my team, my boss, my VP of HR, and other people I was close with at the company when I had transfers coming up. Now, most people like to keep those things, I shouldn't say most. A lot of people that I talk to in this community like to keep those dates private because one, You don't want the added pressure of people knowing and thinking and asking, like, did it take? Did it take? Did it take? I get that. But there is a chance it doesn't work. And I wanted the people that I worked with to understand, like, hey, if this does work, I want to take my time and tell everyone when I'm ready. But if this doesn't work, I may need some days off because I may be. And I told my company when my first transfer was coming up. And when it didn't work, I had shared, well, first off, let me actually go back and share a story with you guys. So I was at work when I got the call about our transfer not working. I should have taken that day off. I did not know that. No one had told me that. I went in for my beta blood test in the morning and they said, "Okay, great, we'll call you this afternoon." And I probably should have asked what time, early afternoon, late afternoon, what? But I expected, here's what I thought in my mind. I'll go back to work after my blood test, and I was in office this day, and I'll work a couple hours, and then that afternoon I'll go home. So when I get the call, I'm at home. I also did not think it was going to be negative if you've listened to any of my other podcasts. So I'm at work. Like most of us, we get caught up, we get busy. I look down and I'm like, oh shit, it's 2:00. I wanted to be home by now. And it's like, of course, right at that time, I get a phone call. So I go to my office and I shut the door and I take it. And they tell me, "We're so sorry, but your pregnancy test was negative." And I just lose it, bawling. And I am like, I have to now walk through my office to my car in front of all of these people crying because I'm not going to be able to get it together. Now, they knew, so they probably would have put two and two together, but I didn't want people to see me crying and in that vulnerable state. So I messaged one of the girls I worked with and I was like, "Hey, can you come down to my office?" And I shared with her after I called Drake. I immediately picked up the phone and called Drake and was like, "I'm at work. I just got this news. I'm a mess. Can you meet me at home?" So then I messaged this girl I work with and I'm like, "Can you come down to my office?" I tell her what happened and I'm like, "Can you let me know kind of when the coast is clear so I can walk out the back?" I, of course, cry the whole way home. The whole rest of the day is horrible. But people I work with knew. And so I asked the girl that I worked with, like, "Hey, can you just give everyone a heads up so I don't have to do it?" I then texted my boss and told him, and he was like, "Hey, take tomorrow off. Don't come in. Do what you need to do." I was so appreciative of that. And I don't know that I would have been able to handle those conversations and tell a person, like, "Hey, this thing that I was counting on working didn't work. And now I need time off." Not that I was scared to say that. Like, I physically could not speak for like 24 hours. I would just cry. So I was thankful that I had set those expectations. I was thankful I had an employer and coworkers who understood and gave me that time to grieve and said, like, "Don't worry about it. We got you. We got your workload. Go." I was so thankful. There's like all of these moments throughout your infertility journey. Oh my gosh, my eyes are going to like tear up. There are all these moments throughout your infertility journey that just warm your heart. And for me, that one, it's like a core memory. And it's like, these people that you work with, they come and go. They probably don't even think anything of it. But that meant the world to me that my company said, "Go home. Take tomorrow off. Don't worry about it. We got you. We've got it handled." My team at the time was like, "We've got it. Don't worry about it. If we have a question, we'll go to someone else." My CEO at the time saw our Instagram post about it not working and reached out and said, "Whatever you need, time off, you need anything, let us know." These are moments, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose it. These are moments that just mean so much. And if I had not shared me going through infertility and going through IVF with my company, with my employees, I don't know what those next couple days and weeks would have looked like. You know, someone says something about pregnancy or a baby or asks you, when are you going to have a baby? If they don't know and you're going through that, I don't know how I would have reacted, but I was met with such grace. And yeah, they probably handled me with kid gloves for a week or two after that. But then I got back to normal, and they were there for me. And then the second transfer happened and it failed. And I was met with the same kindness and grace and support. And I hope in the near future that I'm able to tell them, like, I'm pregnant. I hope that happens. So, anyways, I think infertility in the workplace is taboo. It's awkward. There's no way around it. I was joking with, I said at the beginning of the episode, one of my best friends works in HR. And I was like, I love talking about IVF at work. I love talking about my journey. I love it. I think it's great. And I love that people ask me. I was talking with one of my employees and said, like, hey, I'm gonna miss this one thing this day. And I have an appointment. And he was like, oh, is it an IVF appointment? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, how are things going? And it was so nice and like great that he asked. And I got to share exciting news of like, oh, we're starting another round and I have a doctor's appointment. And it was great. But I joked with her. I'm like, it's awkward because anytime a guy asks me about IVF, I immediately just think like, vagina, uterus, baby, all these things. They're not thinking that. That's just me being me. But we all think something. If I tell this person I'm going through IVF, what are they going to think when I talk about this subject? If I tell my work I'm going through infertility, what are they going to think when I share this news with them? When I tell my work I'm going through IVF, are they going to be supportive? Or are they going to think, oh, is this going to mess up our insurance rates? I hope for every single person listening, for every single person out there, that your experience with infertility in the workplace is positive. I hope that. But I'm a realistic person, and I know that is not the truth, unfortunately. I also hope that we as a human race can talk about this subject more so it's not so stigmatized. So we can get it to where it is covered by insurance. So we could get it to where, one, we as a country, the United States, need to have maternity leave with every company, but we don't. But maybe one day we have maternity leave for everyone. Maybe one day we have IVF covered for everyone, and IUI and infertility treatments and infertility medications. What's wrong with my brain today? Maybe one day we have time off for infertility treatments. I don't know what the future looks like, but I damn sure hope it's better in 1 year. It's better in 5 years. It's better in 10 years. But it starts with us having conversations. So that is all I have for you guys today. I know my situation is different, but I am just one person and I can only share my experience. I'd love for you all to email me or message me on Instagram and share what your experience has been with infertility in the workplace. I'd love to do a follow-up episode to this in 6 months, a year, or whatever, and share what other people have been through and how they've navigated these things. I'd love to have, my friend from HR come on and talk about it from an employer standpoint. How do we get more employers to understand what their employees are going through? So it's all a dream that one day this is less stigmatized. But until then, I wish you all the best of luck in infertility in the workplace. I want you to know that You have to make that decision to share or not share on your own. And you have to share that news with whoever, however, whenever is best for you. So, thank you all for listening. I hope this has been helpful to at least one person. As always, please like, subscribe, and share this episode. And you can always reach out to me at Everyday Infertility on Instagram, or you can email me at everydayinfertility@gmail.com. I hope you all have a great week, and I will see you all next time. Thanks.